I'm sitting here with Nick Potkalitsky, who is an AI educator and have some very interesting takes on AI's future in education, especially around the high school age. How are you doing over there, Nick?
I'm doing pretty good. So I'm in uh been having a pretty good week here at school and have had actually some really engaging conversations with students this week about AI. They're very interested in our having teachers catch up a little bit more quickly uh, because they're sort of noticing their classmates using AI extensively for assignments and while they're kind of working away without those resources, and they're sort of wondering, you know, for more, they want more equity in terms of grading and accountability. That seems to be where the students are that's what they're kind of talking about this week. So it's been kind of cool to hear from the students, and I'm talking to a lot of teachers, and now the students are kind of joining in the conversation too. So
And what you're also pointing to there is a number one thing I have thought about in regards to AI in education. It's of course how ChatGPT can be used to write the student essays and for plagiarism.
yeah.
So if we start there, like, what's your thoughts on that? How can we handle this problem?
Yeah, it's really complicated, and we've, in the educational arena, we've been talking about it for over a year now, and there's no like golden ticket if we're gonna use sort of the phrase from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's no golden ticket here that's going to give us the perfect solution. But I have figured out a few things just in my own experience. Definitely AI detectors, they're not reliable enough to use as a primary screener in classrooms. So I'd hate to use something that gets 1 out of 10 false positives to hand out a zero on a student. But I know there are teachers who use them to kind of initiate conversations. Teachers who maybe don't really know a lot about AI generated context and can't recognize some of its more recognizable features have resorted to it in their initial phase of AI literacy. But I, as a teacher who has been using AI for the generation of classroom materials, and I've used it in my own writing practices, so I'm pretty conversant with its strengths and its limitations. I can smell it out when it is being used. And I particularly, I found like the more specific I can write my prompts, then you can kind of see when kids are kind of putting those prompts in pretty specifically to generate that content. Because when they drop those really specifically worded prompts in, you're sort of laying those breadcrumbs that you can use to retrace the steps of the students who are then dropping that same material into the LLM to create that specific content. So, that's kind of helping you with sort of the more naive case use of AI in students, which is really where most kids are at right now, because they're just kind of presuming that we as teachers don't really know how to detect it. I know there are kids out there that are much more savvy with it. And those are kids, I think, who are actually really developing the kinds of skills that we're going to be teaching, 3 or 4 years on in classrooms. How to really prompt to generate new creative ideas and new creative texts using AI. But obviously, if you sort of are trying to lay down, a sort of a prohibition in class saying, we're not going to use it on this assignment, then the kid who's using it in a higher level way is definitely going against the spirit of the process that you're trying to teach. So, but those are much harder things to detect, and I think you have to lean into like knowing your student's voice. And I have a series of assignments in class, some of them handwritten, that help establish who is this student, what kind of how do they write, what are sort of their common sentence structures. You can develop kind of a writing composite of your student early on, and you can do that in tandem with their previous teachers, writing and humanities teachers. So it's you kind of have to it's not like with the old plagiarism detectors where it was just kind of finding here's this text that was being copied and pasted from an existing source. It's a much more holistic process. But I mean, that's a lot of labor. And I think there's going to come a tipping point where we have to decide whether that's ultimately how we want to spend our time. And I'm increasingly of the mind that we just have to change the way that we teach. Maybe long form essays are going to be increasingly of the past. Maybe writing has to happen more in class, less homework, more multimodal assignments. That's kind of where I'm going, like doing writing in different kinds of forms, where it's being put on posters and where there's more of an oral performance aspect to it. But it's going to be 3 to 5 years before we iron that out. So it's going to be like we're kind of in sort of a experimental phase where we're going to be doing some of the old and some of the new for a while. And but to just fall back on these AI detectors as if there's some infallible tool, and then to bring in sort of a surveillance culture into the classroom is I think is going to be a real mistake.
Do you have do you have a clear idea of where the development of AI in the classrooms are going? Or are you more kind of like experimenting with different things, or seeing where things are going? Or do you have like a vision for how things will turn out in, like, let's say 5 years time?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to kind of define sort of an end goal for successful AI implementation and integration, and knowing that right now it's going to be provisional. That we don't fully know the impact of integrating these software into student workflows. How is that impacting their development of what I call like more core writing skills, the skills that kind of pre-exist the drop of ChatGPT, the skills that we've been hammering away at in writing classrooms for the last 200 years or so. So we don't know if kids are going to be using this in like a more of a circular feedback loop where they're writing without AI for a little bit, and then they're interacting with an AI system to get ideas, and then they're kind of like toggling back and forth. Like how is that going to play out in terms of like their overall like higher order reasoning, cognitive development? Like part of the questions that we're sort of asking, and particularly in light of like the COVID pandemic, like, are we going to be stealing away opportunities for kids to really think creatively, really sort of have a spot to like generate something from nothing, kind of start from scratch? Because I'm seeing in the kids that I'm teaching right now, they've been so heavily prompted throughout the pandemic, through all of the different learning systems we've put in front of them, that they have a lot of difficulty just like starting with very like basic assignments. Like we have to like really heavily scaffold like everything that they're working on, which I mean, it isn't a bad thing. It's just like, it's just where they're at. But if we're being honest, you know, they're at, like on the whole, they're probably about, you know, a year and a half to maybe 2 years behind where kids were like 5 years ago. So when you bring AI into the mix, it's like, is this going to actually help them, or is this going to be just another process that is like, is going to be like another like jump starter for them, and not going to help them with that core, like being able to like say, oh, I can actually jump start a whole process. And or, you know, but one could push back on that idea and say, well, now that AI is in the room, you know, maybe they never need to do that sort of, you know, I call it like ex nihilo, like starting from nothing kind of thinking. Like maybe that's sort of in the past, you know. So that maybe that's just like a nostalgic thing that I'm holding on to because I had to do it, you know, but now kids don't have to do it anymore. So, but you know, there's a current underneath all that I'm sort of wondering, like in terms of like neurological cognitive development, you know, are they going to miss out on something in terms of like higher reasoning, critical thinking skills? Like, are they going to get to college and just not have that one, like this facet of problem solving that they're like really going to need for the workplace? Because we know that AI can only help you with like so many things, right? It takes existing inputs, but it doesn't do well with like out of context learning. So and it's debatable whether it ever will, at least according to its like current ways of being trained. So I don't know. I sort of like imagine this future of people who are trained on AI and don't have that jump starting capability. And I'm wondering like, where's innovation going to be going if we have like a whole generation of people who are just like relying on these AI systems to jumpstart ideas, but they don't have that capacity themselves. So it's a long like way of saying like, I think we have to put a premium still on like higher order reasoning, problem solving, like our curriculum. And this is going to be part of my work, you know, in the classroom, is like what can I do to sort of like create problems in the classroom that my kids are going to have to like work together to solve, you know, since I'm not going to need to since we're not going to need to like teach writing as meticulously, you know, like the humanities space is going to have to be like a more of like a critical problem solving space where I get these kids to like dig into more metacognitive thinking, analytical reasoning, logic, you know, testing out ideas and hypotheses like in real time. So like a very simple example would be like designing like a business plan. And then the writing would become more focused on like rhetorically positioning your business in a marketplace and using AI to think about different options for how you might market your business and how you might overcome different challenges, you know, if the economy takes sort of a downturn, or let's say the kids are asked to like compete together within sort of a same sort of market share, same like they're designing similar products, you know, and kind of like upping the stakes and upping the engagement by almost like turning the classroom into kind of like a gamified kind of you know, that I mean that's kind of what I see in the next, you know, 5-10 years sort of for the humanities classroom.
And this was also a problem even before AI entered into the scene of education, I suppose, that with, you know, a part of the school system, students can actually game by, you know, going for the high grades. I've experienced that myself at the law school, where it's important because the big law firms, they only hire, or at least the best law firms only hire the students with the best grades. So
Yeah,
it creates a kind of competitive environment where there's a lot of focus on getting these numbers on, on a paper. And sometimes, from my own experience, it feels like students don't really care that much about learning. It's more
yeah,
about just gaming the grade system and get a nice jobs afterwards. And that's one of the
definitely.
things I thought was a pity by studying law, because learning also like the substance of the material and like be able to remember it many years after and actually, get a sense of what you're talking about. That's also what makes us human, right?
Right.
Because if you're just repeating a bunch of stuff you've read in a textbook, we can discuss how much you've really learned from it, unless you have kind of internalized it. So that's one of the
Yeah.
thing I'm also worried about AI and education, because in general there's a lot of focus on AI on optimizing processes. And
Hmm.
in the education system, it's such a vulnerable system because it's where students learn, and it's where our future employees and bosses are going to
Yeah.
get their baggage. So it's so important, and so it's kind of a tricky situation because on one hand, AI has so much potentially to help these students. And on the other hand, it's also a bit sensitive because if we move forward with something, it might have implications that we can't really foresee.
You're absolutely right, Tobias. Yeah, you're really well put there. So yeah, I mean, huge consequences, and that's why, at least in the U.S., it's moving very, very slowly. And and I in uh, my blog on Substack, Educating AI, I'm certainly asking individual teachers to move more quickly in terms of their experimentations, particularly in their own work cycles using AI. But I thoroughly respect large school systems taking their time on this one, because if we get it wrong, it could be cataclysmic. We could have just a whole generation of students, kind of like I was forecasting. Um, you know, like as of right now, we have a generation of kids that are pretty disengaged, and then we could have on top of that, we could have a whole generation of kids who kind of like lack that creative, innovative spark that I think all in all, this current generation still has in some form. So we definitely have to tread carefully, but we also are on a time clock, because at least in my school, the kids already have it in their hands. So we have to keep pace side by side with them and develop a response sort of. I mean, we used the analogy a lot during the pandemic of building the plane while we're flying it, but we're kind of in another situation like that. And I don't know, teachers are just tired right now. So
Hmm.
I mean, we just had to rebuild all our schools to respond to COVID, and now we're just settling back into some sort of normalcy, and then this AI robot comes out, and now we're having to rebuild all over again. So there's a real sense of
Yeah, I,
fatigue right now.
I could imagine. I could imagine. What about the kids? Do you feel like your students now have a different mentality when it comes to going to school than previous generations, or maybe just 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's been last year. It felt like there was some real joy in being back together and being unmasked, and uh, a real sense of camaraderie, at least at my school. And um, and then after that, the initial glow of that passed, then there's sort of a little bit of like across the board sort of like resentment in terms of like being asked to like re-engage with the serious work of learning, because things were relatively easy during the pandemic in terms of workload, and I think a lot of teachers felt like they had to make up for lost time, and they sensed that there were some real gaps. And it seemed like across the board, at least at my school, we sort of upped our game a little bit, and we started to really put some challenges in front of students, and students are just more focused on the social within schools right now, and kind of making up for that time lost, and the academics just aren't quite as centered. And I think we as teachers have to take some ownership on that. I just don't think what we're asking our students to do just feels very relevant anymore. I think we could for some reason we could get away with it before the pandemic, but right now it's the cultural seams have shifted, and there's just people. There's a lot of like more last minute kind of turn-ins, and and I'm at a private school where our kids have a lot of support and perform pretty well on standardized tests and whatnot, and it's sort of across the board, just looking for ways to cut corners, and I think part of that's on the students, but part of it's we're just not delivering a very interesting product and experience. So like we can't keep doing the things that we were taught when we were teachers. So
It's
and that's why,
also like one of the challenges with smartphones and social media, because
yeah,
kids nowadays, and also like I can recognize it from myself, that we're so used to this instant gratification and dopamine hits all the time.
oh
So
yeah,
when we
yeah,
have to sit down and do hard work, and I even feel that now, when I write long essays and such, it can be very, very hard to concentrate,
yep,
because suddenly the smartphone is just calling my name,
yep,
and it's really
yep,
hard to ignore it. And now with TikTok and all those other, so many social medias, right? Like
yeah,
Discord,
oh yeah.
Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit. I don't know how people have time for living with all of these apps on the phone.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. No, I
Yeah,
feel it.
it's
I feel it too. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and schools in the U.S. right now are sort of at a decision point with phones in particular, and I think we're going to see a sort of a real movement to prohibit cell phones in schools, kind of across the country.
what do you think about that?
I think it's complex. I don't have a strong position one way or the other. I kind of think about it more from a historical, cultural position, and that's how I'm planning on writing about it on my Substack. And here are the factors that, as I'm composing sort of some drafts on it, like we were in the pandemic, and we had to put in this like prohibitive apparatus very quickly to keep our kids safe. Like, and we put those right into the hearts of our schools and other aspects of our society. So so we had so in schools we were 6 feet apart, and we had masks, and we were reducing class sizes. Some schools were doing like bubbles and alternating days. So like very quickly, the school, which has always been like a system of power and control, it sort of like it became much more overt in terms of its power, its expressions of power, and rightfully so. I'm not I'm not trying to make the schools out as as overreaching in that particular context. But as conditions on the ground shifted, and we started to normalize, and we went from pandemic to epidemic. We got kids back in school. I would argue that the schools still, in a certain sense, they remain sort of in kind of a hyper control mode. Like they still had, once those powers were kind of activated, schools, they have them kind of like they're sort of sitting there like in a potentiary kind of position, right? So, and I see schools right now, and we saw this kind of quickly happening once ChatGPT came out. Like we immediately saw schools like turning that potentiary position into a more active position. Boom, like we were banning ChatGPT. Like it was like overnight. We had like entire states, entire countries, and I would argue that if COVID, if we hadn't experienced that as a historical event, it might have taken us a lot longer to get to a position where we had outright bans on AI. So what I'm exploring here is like we had a historical antecedent that led us to and prepared us for a very strong response. So what I'm thinking is happening with cell phones is like, okay, we now see post-pandemic, like cell phones are a real issue, but we've known cell phones are a real issue like since 2016, since the Facebook scandals happened, like since all the studies came out about cell phone misuse and the correlations between mental well-being and et cetera. Like we've known this, but in this particular historical moment now, we're flipping the switch, right? And we're going to prohibit them in all school spaces, right? So I just think we have to think about like the historical build up to this moment. I think we have to think about kids' responses to these prohibitions, because I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think kids are going to feel pretty disempowered. It's going to feel maybe like a second like COVID lockdown for kids. I do see, as a teacher, I do see the need for kids to be less distracted. I know the research. I know that when they get on their phones, like it unworks some of the learning that they're doing in classrooms. But I just think we have to be like very thoughtful about how we go about putting in these restrictions, or we're just going to disengage kids even more than we already are. That's kind of my posture. That's kind of a position.
Yeah.
That's my rough draft right now. It's just
Sure.
we have to think before we just pull them out of their hands. So.
And here at the end, what advice do you have to other teachers or educators who are interested in introducing more AI into their classrooms, or who are also struggling with this, how to deal with smartphone? Like just general advice. What would you say?
Yeah, I'd say get on Substack, and we got a great community growing of educators. So if you're looking for trying to turn the corner in terms of AI integration, just spend some time using the technology yourself. and try to generate some papers, run your prompts through, see what it can do, what AI can't do. But there's a guy named Lance Cummings who is really doing some amazing work in terms of helping students create prompts to do specific types of writing tasks. There's another gentleman, a professor named Mark Watkins, who has some, every week he's putting out some really thoughtful stuff, just big picture kind of criticism of, sort of the hype, both for and against AI integration. And there's a gentleman also named Eric Hudson who used to work at GOA, sort of a big global teacher training outfit, who writes very calm, clear insights and into AI integration, and he's doing a series right now on trust, on building trust between students, kind of as like the sort of the primary foundation for anything we do within the classroom. And I think he's absolutely right that we need to foreground student trust, and if we can manage to maintain that, both in terms of AI and our cell phone policies, we'll be heading in a pretty good direction in the next couple of years.
Okay, Nick, it's been very nice talking with you.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you too, Tobias. I really respect all the work you're doing, all the great writing you're doing with Futuristic Lawyer. So keep it up.
Thanks, and likewise.